Hey guys. Tonight, damp stone breathes cool against your skin and torch smoke curls like bitter incense along a narrow lane. Leather creaks at your shoulder. Somewhere a tavern door sighs, spilling yeast, sweat, and a rumor shaped like a knife. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. In towns like Paris or Florence, assassins favored alleys like this, tight, echoing, fast to vanish. Think of it as medieval stealth mode, just with worse shoes. You feel the city settle after curfew, bells fade, shutters click, and the watch's halberds tick, stone-like metronomes. Roof tiles hold the day's heat, clay-sweet and dusty. Gutters whisper with rain and kitchen peelings. Curfew mattered, couvre-feu meant fires banked and streets cleared, so anyone moving now wore purpose like a cloak. A hidden rondel dagger rode the ribs. Statutes banned such blades after dark. Imagine explaining that to a guard without inventing parkour before breakfast. We'll return to that in a moment. Soon you'll walk softly through their real night. The clothes that didn't swish, the boots that didn't slip, the codes that bought silence, and the cheap rooms where death knocked before dawn. You'll taste their tools, fees, decoys, poisons, and the myths. And why so many died young, infected cuts, bad exits, angry patrons, and politics with teeth. Settle in, breathe slower, and, if you haven't yet, tapping like and subscribe helps more than you think. Now let's dim the lantern and begin. You hear it first, the groan of wagon wheels over cobblestones, the hiss of piss down a gutter, and the faint jingle of chainmail somewhere in the mist. The medieval street wasn't a background. It was a living creature, swollen with life and decay. In its veins, secrets pulsed alongside sewage. Every turn smelled of survival and sin. Here, in the tightest arteries of stone, a man could vanish, or be made to vanish, without ceremony, without witness, and without even a whisper of consequence. The air itself was thick with alibis. It reeked of turnips, tallow smoke, and horse sweat, a perfume so potent it could hide anything, even guilt. Beneath that stench, blades whispered between sleeves, and eyes measured distance like priests counting prayers. Architecture conspired with intent, alleys so narrow a heartbeat could echo like thunder. In such a place, invisibility was never about darkness, but timing. Miss your cue by a breath, and the city itself would become your grave. By night, the world thinned. The lamps gasped on iron hooks, coughing smoke that painted halos over puddles. Roof tiles still radiated the day's warmth, and the moon fell against them like milk over clay. You could hear the curfew bell die slow in the distance, as the watch marched past with halberds tapping rhythm. In that breath between patrols, the assassins came alive. They moved like moths, drawn to the faintest glow, repelled by everything else. Romantic stories will tell you they were noble. They weren't. They were born of hunger, not honor, trained by famine, not philosophy. Their discipline was desperation. Their initiation, survival. They learned from the quiet arithmetic of need, a loaf stolen, a threat answered, a coin earned in blood. When morality costs more than bread, principles become a luxury item. Poverty teaches faster than any master, and in this city, failure was the only exam you didn't retake. Cobblestones bruised every step. Rain gathered in the cracks like gossip, carrying reflections of lanterns that never stayed lit long enough to comfort anyone. You can almost hear your boots sliding, feel the damp biting your ankles, Behind shutters, the city watched and yet didn't see. Indifference was its camouflage. Nobody cared who disappeared behind the tavern if it didn't interrupt their supper. Everyone was too busy not dying to notice death. The city woke early. By dawn, the blood was scrubbed, the barrels rolled, and the traders shouted fresh lies about fish that smelled like truth. Murder was a civic rhythm, a quiet punctuation between market days. You could almost measure the hour by it. If watches had existed, they would have ticked to the pulse of violence. And if they had, someone would have pawned theirs to hire a man who could stop another man's. Assassins were city scholars. They studied air currents, torch angles, and the cadence of footsteps. They knew which courtyards echoed, which corners swallowed sound. Every sense was sharpened for efficiency. Their breath became part of the architecture, measured and methodical. To them, fear wasn't weakness, it was calibration. Their pulse was a compass, and control was salvation. Even monks didn't meditate that deeply. Of course, many were amateurs, drunks with daggers, rogues with delusions. But luck is a stubborn teacher. The crowd loved myths of invisible killers. Truth was too dull for song. Legends grew faster than bodies cooled. Even then, marketing outperformed merit. A man who tripped over his own cloak might still be remembered as a ghost if the story sold enough ale that night. There were women too, far cleverer than the ballads admit. They poisoned gently, whispered lies like silk threads, turned affection into alchemy. A kitchen maid could end a dynasty faster than a sword ever could. They were invisible not because they hid, but because the world refused to look. And invisibility is the perfect disguise. Beneath their feet, the city bled into itself, gutters carrying away both water and memory. The nobles tutted in outrage each morning, sipping wine that had been paid for with death the night before. They called assassins monsters while hiring them by candlelight. The hypocrisy smelled faintly of lavender and iron, the perfume of clean hands that never held the blade. Life here was fragile, like candlelight trembling in a draught. One careless rumor, one unpaid favor, and the dark would come calling. But some loved that uncertainty. It gave meaning to monotony. The city was a playhouse of risk, and everyone had a role. Some just had sharper props. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might hear the applause of ghosts for a show that never truly ended. Soon, you'll step deeper into their private world. The rooms they slept in, the tools they trusted, the rituals that kept them alive until they didn't. But before that, take one last look at this street. It's still breathing. It always is. Iron smells the same in every century. Cold, sweet, metallic. In the assassins' quarters, that scent lingered between mildew and ale. Their instruments weren't treasures of legend, just the leftovers of practicality, cracked daggers, horsehair garrots, small crossbows held together by wishful twine. Each tool had history and hunger carved into it. Nothing sacred, nothing elegant, only function and fear. You can almost feel your fingers brush a blade, still warm from sharpening, still loyal enough to betray you. Training was rarely formal. There were no guilds, no masters passing down secret techniques in candlelit halls. Skills came from trial, error, and graveyards. One mistake, a creaky hinge, a breath too loud, and the lesson ended with a priest instead of a teacher. The city itself was the academy, its curriculum carved in consequence. Even the church looked away, as long as confessions were timely and tithes regular. Sin, like everything else, was negotiable. A weapon was never just a tool, it was autobiography. The cloth wrapped around the hilt might have been torn from a mother's dress, the edge sharpened on the same stone used to split walnuts. Death carried fingerprints of the mundane. The irony of it all, that life and death used the same hands, the same fabric, the same stones, gave every strike a cruel poetry. A killer's blade told a story if you knew how to read rust. Poison, though, poison was treacherous. Ratbane might kill a noble, or it might just ruin his evening. Herbs needed precision, and precision needed patience, both rarer than gold. Some tested brews on stray dogs or rats, counting heartbeats in candlelight. It wasn't science, not yet, just grim curiosity wrapped in fear. If the mixture worked, it was genius. If not, well, funerals were free if you dug fast enough. They didn't wear armor. Armor drew attention. Their safety came from blending in, wool that drank shadows, boots that whispered instead of clapped. Every seam was a secret. Pockets nested inside pockets, each holding powders, notes, or coins. Nothing was decoration, everything was deception. You could say their wardrobe invented utility wear centuries before it was fashionable, though no one looked good after 3 nights sleeping beside an unwashed cloak and a bottle of cheap courage. Luck was their second religion. Charms hung around necks, coins rubbed smooth by nervous thumbs, prayers muttered to obscure saints of quiet hands. They mocked superstition until it saved them. Imagine a man who could slit a throat without flinching, yet step back at the sight of a black cat. Absurd, yes, but the absurd is often the only comfort left to those who gamble with mortality nightly. Their own bodies betrayed them most. Cuts festered, fevers spread, and infections traveled faster than gossip in a monastery. A single nick from a rusty blade could mean death within days. No glory, no legend, just rot. The damp ate into bones. The cold stiffened fingers meant for precision. Even death seemed impatient, showing up before the job was finished. Still, they adapted. Pain was routine. Fear, a familiar rhythm. They learned to breathe through terror, to let adrenaline hum softly instead of roar. Detachment became their armor, emotional calluses layered over nerves. Not cruelty, just necessity. You can't hesitate over the human condition when it's your invoice. The best killers weren't heartless, they just learned to rent out their empathy to whoever paid first. When they met, it wasn't camaraderie but commerce. Tavern corners were markets of whispers. Guard schedules, new poisons, noble vendettas, all traded like bread. There were no friends, only recurring clients. Trust was too expensive, and betrayal always on sale. A raised cup could mean a deal or a eulogy. In their world, loyalty expired faster than milk. Occasionally, nobles kept specialists, hired shadows with names that became legends for a month, then corpses by dawn. Fame was fatal branding. The louder the whispers, the shorter the lifespan. The clever changed names like seasons. The fools carved symbols into walls, begging history to notice. History obliged, but briefly. It remembers the dramatic, not the durable. A few even sought meaning in their trade, talking of balance, justice, destiny. Maybe it was guilt, maybe mead. The illusion of purpose was cheaper than absolution. Without it, they were just laborers of death with too much time to think. It's strange how even in darkness, the mind begs for poetry. Killing was ugly, pretending it mattered made it bearable, and so they waited, poised between sin and silence. Surrounded by their tools, cold, loyal, and patient. The dagger slept beside the candle, the rope coiled like a serpent. The crossbow leaned against the wall, dreaming of motion. Everything was ready, but nothing was ever safe. Because in this line of work, the first thing your tools teach you is that they're the last thing you'll ever trust. The room you step into is smaller than a prayer. Straw crunches beneath your boots, the scent of damp hay mixed with last night's smoke. The assassin's hideout isn't cinematic, it's claustrophobic, half basement, half burrow. A single candle leans sideways on the table, wax puddled like forgotten promises. The window doesn't open, the walls breathe mildew, and the only luxury is a wooden cup that doesn't leak much. Yet here, in this stale air, danger sleeps like a pet cat, warm and waiting. Mornings come dim and unwelcome. Light creeps through cracks like a trespasser. You imagine the assassin stirring, stiff joints, cautious breath, the ritual of waking without noise. Every sound is judged, the squeal of leather, the sigh of cloth. Breakfast, if it exists, is stolen bread dipped in thin ale. They live in reverse, resting when others rise, moving when the city sleeps. Their hours run backward, their lives measured not in days, but in targets remaining. These rooms were often rented under false names or not at all. Tavern owners asked few questions when the rent was paid in advance. A man who kept to himself was safer than one who smiled too much. Some assassins carved tally marks under floorboards. Others left coins beneath their mattress, ready for the day they wouldn't return. Even solitude had housekeeping. Dust collected on guilt the same way it did on shelves. The smell of tallow never fades. Smoke clings to everything: hair, blankets, conscience. They cleaned their knives with rags that once wiped sweat, leaving the room perfumed with iron and failure. You can almost hear the whetstone's rhythm, slow and meditative. Sharpening wasn't maintenance, it was confession. Every scrape told a story of someone who wouldn't see another dawn. It was less about the blade's edge and more about staying sane between sins. When work was scarce, boredom became the real enemy. Idle hands shake, idle minds wander. Some spent their downtime gambling, others spying for gossip that might turn profitable later. They studied the city from behind shutters, memorizing who passed where and when. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. Routine was the only way to tame chaos, like tying a ribbon around smoke. Predictability meant survival, even for those who lived by disruption. They ate simply cold meat, sour bread, wine watered enough to taste like regret. Salt was precious, clean water, a myth. Food was fuel, not pleasure. The body mattered only as far as it could obey. Pain, hunger, and fatigue were treated like background noise, always there, seldom acknowledged. You get the feeling that even their sleep was transactional, a brief truce with exhaustion before violence resumed its shift. Privacy was protection. No one entered their rooms uninvited, not even lovers. Doors were barred from inside with furniture that groaned louder than guilt. Visitors left no gifts, only silence. Some assassins kept pets, cats usually, creatures that demanded nothing and witnessed everything. The cat never judged, it simply purred through blood and boredom alike. Maybe that's why it lived longer than its master. Their beds were narrow, their dreams narrower. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by footsteps that might have been real or remembered. The blanket was rough wool, scratchy enough to remind them they were still alive. Every creak of the floorboards rehearsed their reflexes. No one truly rested. They simply paused the performance until the next act. Outside, life continued oblivious. Church bells rang, merchants shouted, children chased each other through puddles. The assassin's world was parallel but invisible, a reflection warped by necessity. You can almost sense the loneliness thick in the air, like humidity you can't escape. They weren't haunted by ghosts, they were haunted by quiet. Sometimes they watched the sunrise through cracks in the wood. The light painted their hands gold for a moment before fading. It was an accident of beauty in a life that didn't ask for any. They'd stretch, sigh, maybe pour stale water over their face. That was their prayer, acknowledging that the world still turned without them, a humble sort of faith. Each day ended as it began, alone, alert, anonymous. They counted coins, sharpened blades, listened for footsteps. Everything else blurred. Life reduced itself to logistics. Perhaps that's what peace looked like, stripped of illusion, survival disguised as discipline. And yet, in that narrow room, something human persisted. Maybe not hope, but habit, pretending to be it. You can still picture it. The candles' flame stuttering near dawn, the dust swirling as if sighing. Their hideouts were more than rooms, they were metaphors. Small, dark, temporary, just like the lives they sheltered. Before a job, silence became sacred. The assassin sat still, hands open, eyes half closed. Some whispered a psalm, others spat 3 times for luck. You can almost hear the faint rustle of fabric, the slow exhale before intent took over. Ritual wasn't religion, it was rhythm, a pattern to convince the heart that chaos could be choreographed. Even killers needed ceremony. It kept the hand steady and the conscience distracted. They had dozens of small beliefs, none written, all enforced by fear. Never draw blade indoors before the job. It brings ghosts. Never step over a body without closing the eyes. Never drink before dusk. You can imagine how these habits began, one survivor's superstition becoming another's inheritance. In a profession without retirement plans, even nonsense felt like insurance. Some carried charms, bones wrapped in cloth, copper coins etched with unknown symbols, bits of saintly relics purchased from liars. Others tied ribbons around their wrists, claiming it bound their soul to their aim. Skeptics mocked them, yet imitated every ritual before a kill. Logic dissolves easily when mortality is involved. The line between devotion and desperation is thinner than a knife's edge. Music was rare, but rhythm was constant. They hummed quietly while waiting, tuneless, slow, hypnotic. It soothed the nerves, gave the illusion of control. Imagine sitting in darkness for hours, timing your heartbeat with every flicker of the candle. The melody became a form of armor, wrapping the mind in familiarity while the world outside sharpened its teeth. Cleanliness mattered oddly. They washed their hands, not out of morality, but habit. Blood had a way of clinging, and superstition said it carried memory. Scrubbing became exorcism. Even cold water felt holy if it erased guilt for a minute. Some washed knives in wine afterward, to feed them, an odd tenderness toward instruments of death. You can almost feel the chill of that water, the sting of conscience diluted in ritual. They never killed on feast days, or so they claimed. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe convenience. Still, you'd find them in taverns instead, pretending to celebrate with everyone else. Laughter camouflaged them better than shadows. When the city rejoiced, suspicion slept. There was strategy in superstition, a logic beneath the madness. Before leaving for a job, they touched thresholds 3 times. Doorways symbolize transition between life and risk, guilt and payment. It wasn't mystical, just muscle memory learned from survival. You do something enough times, and meaning attaches itself whether you like it or not. By then, they didn't believe in luck. They believed in repetition, pretending to be it. Rumor said a few carried small mirrors to trap souls of their victims. More likely, they used them to check corners. Still, mirrors became talismans of accountability. To see yourself before killing was to remember you existed. Some shattered theirs after a job, fearing reflection more than retribution. In that world, truth was the sharpest weapon of all. When jobs went wrong, superstition took the blame. Didn't light the candle right. Forgot to touch the doorway. Crossed paths with a red-haired woman. It was easier than admitting error. Belief provided order in a trade ruled by chaos. You can almost hear the muttered excuses, the weary laugh that follows. People die, but the rituals live longer. At night, they slept with knives under pillows, not out of fear, but habit. Dreams turned tactile, merging with reality. Some awoke mid-swing, others whispered names in languages they didn't speak. Sleepwalking was common. Guilt needed exercise. By morning, they couldn't tell which memories were real. Perhaps that confusion was mercy. And when they finally failed, because every assassin eventually does, the rituals didn't save them. The charms stayed still, the prayers stayed unanswered, and the superstition crumbled like stale bread. But maybe, in their last breath, they found peace in knowing they had tried to control the uncontrollable. That, in the end, is all any of us ever do. The deal always began in whispers. A tavern corner, a flickering candle, the smell of wine masking the scent of fear. The client never used names, just descriptions and coin. You can almost feel the tension ripple through the wooden table, the tremor of anticipation disguised as calm. No parchment, no witness, no ink, only eyes that understood what words dared not say. In the medieval world, silence was safer than signatures, and reputation was notarized in blood. Gold coins gleamed like tiny promises. Payment varied. A pouch of florins for a merchant, a chest of silver for a lord. Sometimes the currency wasn't metal at all, land, secrets, protection. The assassin accepted anything of value because death was an expensive trade. You can almost hear the faint clink of coin on wood, a sound that tasted like both survival and sin. To refuse an offer was rare. To trust the one paying was rarer still. Most contracts began with stories. Clients framed vengeance as justice, greed as honor. They recited wrongs with trembling conviction, stolen inheritance, infidelity, insult. The assassin listened, nodding as if empathy were part of the service. It wasn't. Emotion cluttered precision. Still, every job needed a story to make it tolerable. The human mind, even the darkest one, craves a reason, however flimsy, to justify cruelty. The middlemen were crucial, brokers who arranged deaths without ever holding a knife. You'd find them near the docks, in gambling houses, among beggars who knew too much. They spoke in riddles, dealt in discretion, and charged half the fee for doing none of the work. Assassins tolerated them because anonymity was priceless. The irony. The brokers often lived longer than their clients or their killers. Words, it seems, are sharper than steel when spoken in the right shadows. Once the deal was struck, a ritual of silence followed. Both sides vanished into the city's folds, avoiding even eye contact in the street. Breaking that silence meant certain death, not by law, but by reputation. The underworld thrived on invisible rules, stricter than royal decrees. A noble could escape punishment, a talkative assassin could not. Theirs was a democracy of fear, and everyone obeyed. Occasionally, a client tried to cheat, a smaller payment, a sudden change of heart. Those stories never ended well. Coins are replaceable. Credibility isn't. A betrayed assassin made a public example out of deceit, and rumor did the rest. People learned quickly that the easiest way to die was to underpay someone who already knows how to kill. It kept the economy honest, if nothing else. Not all clients were men. Some of the most elaborate murders came from noble women, tired of arranged misery. They hid their hatred behind veils and perfumes, sending servants with coded messages to the right tavern. The assassin would arrive at their estates disguised as a carpenter or a monk. A new prayer book delivered to the target's bedside, a blade tucked inside its pages. History never mentions their names, but you can still feel their fingerprints on the margins. The language of contracts was beautifully vague. Remove the obstacle. Deliver the message. Ensure the silence. It left just enough room for interpretation and plausible deniability. Words were weapons too, and ambiguity was armor. Assassins understood poetry better than poets. Both lived by what they didn't say. Sometimes the church hired them. Not directly, of course, but through intermediaries with heavy crosses and heavier purses. Heretics had a way of vanishing quietly when doctrine needed tidying. Even holy men understood the usefulness of sinners. And so, in candlelit sanctuaries, prayers mingled with negotiations, and divine justice became a subcontracted service. You can almost hear the hypocrisy echoing off the stone walls. Trust was rare, loyalty rarer. Every partnership ended eventually. Betrayal was simply part of the business cycle. The assassin knew it, accepted it, and planned accordingly. Poison wasn't just for targets, it was also for contingency. One sip for the client, one drop for the self, just in case. You might call it paranoia. They called it professionalism. In the end, the code of silence wasn't enforced by fear of punishment, but by understanding. Words are heavier than daggers. Once spoken, they can't be hidden or cleaned, so they said nothing, not out of loyalty, but because speech was risk, and risk was expensive. The best assassins left no legacy, no lineage, no confession. Only the echo of quiet deals that shaped history from the shadows. And as the candlelight fades, you can almost see the last handshake, brief, careful, final. Both men vanish in opposite directions, bound not by morality, but mutual extinction if either speaks. The city exhales again, unaware that its next story has already been written in invisible ink. In their world, death was an occupational hazard, not a tragedy. You can almost hear the indifference in the tone of their jokes, the way they laughed about funerals like accountants discussing losses. The average assassin didn't expect old age. Life expectancy wasn't measured in years, but in jobs survived. They lived with the calm acceptance of soldiers who had no army, alone, expendable, efficient. Mortality wasn't an enemy, it was overhead. The first rule was simple: never plan beyond tomorrow. Long-term dreams attracted punishment. You start thinking about family, a home, a legacy, and you start hesitating. Hesitation killed faster than any sword. So they lived small, ate what was available, slept where they could, spent their earnings on comfort they could carry. You can almost picture it: a pouch of coins, a spare knife, a bottle of wine, and nowhere to go but forward. Some saved their money, hiding it under floorboards or in churches, trusting that God was a better banker than their friends. Most died before spending half. The lucky ones paid for their own burials in advance, an investment plan against indignity. The rest were dumped in pits, nameless, their possessions divided among the living like vultures divvying bones. The irony. The profession that made people disappear left no trace of itself either. Infection was the most common killer. Not rival assassins, not guards, but pus and fever. A small cut turned into rot within days. The tools of their trade betrayed them. They'd watch the wound darken, smell the sweetness of decay, and know the job had followed them home. You can feel that creeping dread, the understanding that death doesn't always strike. Sometimes it seeps. Some died of accidents, crossbows misfiring, roofs collapsing, horses startled mid-escape. Others were caught and tortured, forced to reveal who hired them. Few ever did. Pain, after a while, lost its urgency. They were professionals in detachment, and besides, most of their clients were dead by then anyway. The silence was self-enforcing. When an assassin vanished, no one asked, no funeral processions, no candles lit in mourning. Maybe a barkeep noticed an unpaid tab. Maybe a cat waited outside a door that would never open again. The world absorbed absence quietly. In that, they achieved the only kind of immortality they ever wanted, to disappear so completely that even memory gave up. Some left notes, but never goodbyes. Instructions, debts, sometimes confessions disguised as jokes. One was found scrawled on a tavern wall. If you're reading this, I'm either rich or dead, probably both. Humor was their coping mechanism, dry as dust, comforting as denial. You can almost hear them chuckle through the ache of inevitability. The rare few who retired did so far from cities. They vanished into monasteries, changed names, learned to prune vineyards or copy scriptures. Perhaps they believed in redemption, or maybe they just wanted quiet. Imagine a man who once killed for coin now teaching silence to novices. The contradiction feels poetic, proof that even darkness gets tired eventually. But the truth is, most didn't retire. They expired, mid-job, mid-thought, mid-step. Death was the uncredited business partner that always collected its share. The city never ran out of replacements. For every assassin buried, 2 more emerged from hunger's shadow. Supply met demand with grim efficiency, and yet their deaths carried a strange dignity. They never expected statues or songs, only completion. When the end came, it was part of the contract, one final task, completed without complaint. Perhaps that's the secret comfort of such lives. No delusions, no false promises, just a quiet acceptance that the ledger must eventually balance. Even now, if you walk the narrow alleys of old cities, you might feel it. That faint chill of memory lingering near the stones. History forgets names, but remembers intent. Somewhere between the echoes and the shadows, their invisible profession hums on, disguised as coincidence. And the world, ever pragmatic, still treats death like business as usual. It always began with stillness. The assassin waited longer than comfort allowed, until the city's heartbeat slowed. No footsteps, no laughter, only the low hum of wind curling through chimney mouths. That silence wasn't absence, it was invitation. You can almost feel the cold seep into your sleeves, the breath turning to mist. Patience was the first weapon, sharper than any dagger. In those suspended minutes, the city's pulse became their metronome. Planning was ritual. They mapped routes in their heads, tracing alleys like veins, memorizing torches, counting guards. Observation was meditation. Hours passed watching doorways, studying habits. Who laughed too loudly, who drank too early, who never looked up. They learned to predict predictability. It wasn't brilliance, it was obsession. Every detail mattered because chaos punished forgetfulness faster than God. The entry was quiet, never cinematic. No shattered windows, no rooftop leaps, just hinges coaxed with oil and luck. You can almost hear the doors sigh, the faint scrape of boots over stone. Candlelight trembled at the disturbance, unaware of its witness. Inside, air hung heavy with cooked fat and incense, a world unaware that history was about to lose a name. They moved like thought, swift, untraceable, yet undeniably human. Breath shallow, pupils wide. The dagger was merely punctuation to a sentence already written. When the blade met flesh, there was no roar, only a soft surprise. The sound of mortality realizing it had an appointment. For all the blood and horror, it was strangely anticlimactic, quiet, efficient, almost bureaucratic. Afterward came the cleanup, the true art of invisibility. Everything was reversed in order, blade wiped, footprints brushed, door unlatched. Sometimes they left a symbol, not for arrogance, but misdirection. Let others chase legends while the real story slipped away down a servant's corridor. You can imagine the faint echo of boots fading, blending into rain. Escape was choreography. Torches flickered, dogs stirred, guards muttered in half-dreams. Every motion carried weight, when to run, when to appear casual, when to vanish. The best assassins never rushed. Panic was noise, and noise killed faster than swords. In their craft, stillness was speed. The city itself participated in the crime. Rain erased footprints, fog swallowed outlines. Market chatter in the morning would cover what screams dared escape. You could say nature was an accomplice, indifferent but reliable. The cobblestones knew how to forget. They'd practiced for centuries. Payment was always delayed. The client waited for proof, a ring, a letter, a head in a sack. Sometimes only silence was confirmation enough. Death had no receipt, only reputation. And in this world, reputation was heavier than armor. Then came decompression, a return to the tavern, the first swallow of ale. The muscles relaxed, the eyes dulled. The human re-entered the assassin's body slowly like water filling a cracked vessel. They never toasted the dead. That would humanize the work. They just drank until memory blurred into superstition again. Each successful job reinforced the illusion of mastery. But mastery was a liar. Every flawless night pushed them closer to arrogance, and arrogance killed quietly. Confidence was the most seductive poison, slow, invisible, terminal. Still, for a brief moment between coin and conscience, they felt something like peace. The world made sense again, reduced to equations of risk and result. And in that calm, the assassin could almost believe they'd earned another sunrise. Almost. The night before, a job carried a strange stillness. The air felt heavier, sounds more distant. You can almost feel the weight of inevitability pressing against the skin. They would sit in silence, staring at the flame of a small candle until it burned unevenly. That flicker became their countdown. each dance of light a reminder that tomorrow someone else would not see it. They cleaned their tools not for necessity, but for meditation. The blade gleamed under lamplight, edges kissed by oil, handle wrapped tight. Every motion was deliberate, a conversation between flesh and steel. You can smell the faint tang of iron and smoke, the comforting rhythm of preparation. Fear was present, always, but domesticated, like a hound trained not to bite unless commanded. Sleep came in fragments. They lay still, half dreaming of footsteps, doorways, and faces they had never met. Sometimes they rehearsed the job in their minds until the lines blurred. You've probably done the same before an important day, replaying outcomes, inventing contingencies. Their version just ended bloodier. Anxiety, it seems, doesn't care what century it lives in. If they prayed, it wasn't for forgiveness. It was for efficiency, for clear sight, steady hands, and luck obedient enough to behave for one more night. They prayed to saints no one remembered, patrons of lost causes and secret sins. And maybe those saints listened, not out of mercy, but boredom. Food tasted strange that evening. Every bite carried the metallic tang of anticipation. They ate slowly, chewing through the thought of tomorrow. Wine didn't calm nerves, it sharpened them, turning the world into sharper focus. The candlelight blurred, and suddenly the line between life and ritual felt paper-thin. They avoided people, even friends. Conversation risked humanity, and humanity was expensive. Too much empathy dulled the blade. So they chose isolation, a small room, shuttered tight, air thick with candle wax and dread. You can almost hear their breathing, even, and rehearsed, sinking with the steady tick of resolve. Sometimes they wrote letters, never to anyone specific, just to themselves, confessions folded into riddles. Tomorrow, I become a rumor, one note read. Most burned them before dawn. Fire was the only trustworthy messenger. Ash told no tales. If rain fell that night, it was taken as a blessing. It muffled footsteps, cleaned streets, and cloaked intentions. If the sky stayed clear, they waited for fog instead. The weather was a colleague, and nature, as always, preferred neutrality. You can almost feel the damp promise of an overcast sky helping them hide. Some kept relics of their victims, rings, locks of hair, trinkets, not trophies, but reminders. Proof that death was tangible, that they weren't merely ghosts moving through rumor. A strange kind of empathy, twisted and quiet. Others simply stared into darkness, letting it stare back. The mind wandered where courage feared to go, toward questions of meaning, mortality, and whether any of this mattered. In that fragile space between thought and sleep, something human tried to surface, but dawn always interrupted before it could speak. And then the candle sputtered. The night folded in on itself, quiet and final. The assassin stood, adjusted the cloak, and exhaled the last trace of hesitation. When the flame died, so did doubt. Only motion remained. The victims were rarely villains. More often, they were bureaucrats, merchants, or nobles whose only crime was visibility. You can almost see them now, ink-stained fingers, heavy robes, a faint wine flush across their cheeks. They believed themselves safe behind stone walls and servants. Safety, in those days, was just a story the rich told to help them sleep. Somewhere outside, someone else stayed awake to end it. The assassin's approach was invisible long before it was physical. They studied their targets with the patience of weather. What time they rose, how they prayed, which wine dulled their sense first. They mapped habits the way cartographers mapped coasts, each routine a coastline of vulnerability. The wealthy believed in locks, the wise believed in routine. Both made excellent guides. You can smell the layers of their world, beeswax on polished floors, roasted goose from the kitchen, perfume drowning the stench of human decay. Candles flickered along corridors lined with tapestries that told heroic lies. Every luxury amplified fragility. The finer the silk, the easier it tore. Nobility was mostly theatre, and the assassin was the final critic, delivering silence instead of applause. Servants were the invisible arteries of these households. They carried gossip like blood, delivering secrets to anyone who knew how to listen. A coin, a compliment, a glance. Bribes didn't always require gold. Many assassins never drew a blade because a servant had already loosened the poison's cork or left a door conveniently unlatched. Loyalty was a myth invented by employers. Some targets sensed danger days before. A candle snuffed out too quickly. A familiar voice in the courtyard at the wrong hour. A dream of drowning. Paranoia has a scent, sharp, sweaty, metallic. You can almost taste it in the air of those estates. They'd call for more guards, more wine, more prayers. None of it mattered. You can't outthink someone who's already been inside your habits for weeks. When the assassin finally entered, it was rarely through violence. A servant's disguise, a borrowed key, a polite knock. Death often arrived looking entirely reasonable. The first thing the victim noticed wasn't pain, it was confusion. The second was silence. You might think they screamed, but most didn't. Humans are slow to accept their final interruption. Afterward, the house exhaled. The candles burned down, indifferent. Servants moved through rooms pretending not to notice the new stillness. Somewhere, a clock chimed as if on schedule. The assassin was already gone. The city wouldn't know until morning that wealth had briefly hesitated before turning into memory. News traveled fast in whispers. A noble found dead, no sign of struggle. Rumors multiplied, inventing motives, lovers, curses. The truth mattered less than the story. You can imagine the priest's trembling hands as he prepared his sermon about divine punishment. Everyone loved moral lessons so long as they happened to someone else. For the assassin, each death blurred into routine. Faces lost definition, names evaporated, only the pattern remained. Wait, strike, vanish. The world recorded the victim's legacy, never theirs. In a way, that was mercy. History forgets killers faster than it forgets the killed. But sometimes, late at night, even they wondered who these people really were. Did the merchant deserve it? Did the baron's last words mean anything? Then the thought passed, replaced by coin and caution. Questions didn't pay rent. Silence did. And yet, even now, you can still feel them both, the killer and the killed, lingering in the air of old palaces, stitched invisibly into the fabric of luxury. Two halves of the same economy joined forever by the price of forgetting. Dawn broke as if nothing had happened. Pigeons cooed, bread baked, bells rang. The world has a habit of continuing politely after catastrophe. You can almost see the first light crawling across rooftops, touching the spot where blood had dried invisible in the night. Morning doesn't mourn, it simply moves on. The servants were first to find the body. Their reactions varied: shock, weeping, denial, but beneath it all, calculation. Who would they work for now? How would this affect their wages? In a world built on hierarchy, even grief followed protocol. Someone fetched the priest, someone cleaned the floor. Death was an inconvenience, not a mystery. Outside, gossip spread faster than the smell of bread. Merchants whispered to customers, guards exchanged theories, and the baker swore he saw a hooded figure hours before dawn. The city thrives on rumor. It's how memory multiplies. Everyone preferred their own version of events, sculpted to make sense of the senseless. Truth, meanwhile, packed its belongings and left town quietly. Authorities arrived late, as they always did. They measured nothing, questioned little, and blamed everything on thieves or foreigners. Investigations were performative, designed to reassure, not reveal. Justice in medieval cities was theatre played to an audience of fear. The real culprits were usually the ones lighting the candles at the vigil. You can imagine the assassin, miles away, blending into morning traffic. Cloak damp, face calm, steps unremarkable. They might be buying bread, sharing small talk with a vendor. Murder and mundanity coexisted easily. That was the art, appearing ordinary enough to be invisible. History remembers drama, not quiet competence. Meanwhile, the noble's death rippled through politics. Debts were cancelled, inheritances fought over, new alliances whispered in back rooms. Someone always benefited. In that sense, assassination was simply another form of bureaucracy, messy paperwork resolved with blood instead of ink. You could almost call it efficient governance if you ignored the ethics. The widow or widower performed grief as etiquette demanded. Black cloth, lowered gaze, perfumed tears. Mourning was a social performance long before it was sincere. Behind closed doors, they recalculated fortunes and invitations. Death rearranged hierarchies more effectively than coronations. As for the common people, they quickly turned the event into entertainment. Ballads appeared within days, each less accurate than the last. Street performers recited exaggerated versions, children reenacted it with sticks. The rich died privately, but the poor celebrated publicly. That's how class systems stay balanced. Someone's tragedy becomes someone else's story. The church conducted its rituals, muttering Latin over the departed, while carefully avoiding questions about motives. Every death meant another donation, another candle, another justification for divine order. The assassin's work sustained more priests than prayers ever did. Back in the assassin's room, life resumed its unglamorous rhythm. They counted coins, wiped blades, and stared at the candle burning unevenly. No satisfaction, no remorse, just routine. Success wasn't joy, it was relief. They had survived another night. The world would keep turning, indifferent and exact. And as the city settled into daylight, everything appeared normal again. Birds sang, bells tolled, lovers quarrelled, and the cobblestones hid their secret well. Only the faint metallic scent in the air betrayed what had happened. History, ever pragmatic, took a breath and wrote another name in ink, leaving the invisible hand that erased it uncredited. By the 13th century, whispers turned into myth. People began to imagine secret brotherhoods of assassins, organized, mystical, guided by codes older than kings. You can almost hear the fascination in the marketplace gossip, a hidden order with rituals, passwords, and loyalty stronger than blood. Reality, as usual, was far duller, but the legend was useful. It gave shape to fear, and fear, once named, could be sold. Travelers returning from the east told stories of the Hashashin, mountain men sworn to invisible masters. They said these killers smoked strange herbs that dulled pain and erased doubt. They claimed paradise was promised to every successful mission. In truth, they were likely mercenaries with good marketing and terrible press. Still, the myth stuck, embroidered into European imagination like a stain that never washed out. In Europe, the idea of a disciplined order appealed to nobles. They wanted to believe that killers obeyed structure, that murder followed rules, chaos terrified them, hierarchy comforted them. So chroniclers invented brotherhoods, guilds of shadows, governed by oaths and sacred texts. The assassins themselves said nothing. Silence made the myth stronger. And why deny a story that made your threat sound divine? Reality was more fragmented. Small cells of professionals operated independently, families, friends, apprenticeships born out of convenience. There were no temples, no leaders, no mystical blades blessed by prophets. Just taverns, markets, and desperate men sharing rumors about better jobs. The Brotherhood was a metaphor, a lie that everyone pretended to believe because it simplified terror into something digestible. Still, symbols appeared, a black hood, a silver ring, a mark carved into a doorframe. Whether coincidence or design, these echoes shaped a new mythology. A noble could sleep easier, thinking his assassin belonged to an ancient fraternity rather than a starving stranger with a steady hand. Death, when draped in ritual, felt oddly respectable. You can almost picture it. Stories spreading from tavern to cathedral. Priests warning against heretical orders. Scholars writing treatises about invisible armies of sin. Every retelling made the assassins more supernatural, more disciplined, more cinematic. The truth, filthy, disorganized, human, was too disappointing to survive. History prefers poetry over paperwork. Some killers began adopting the image themselves. They wore the symbols, spoke in coded phrases, and acted as if destiny guided them. Performance became power. Merchants haggled over goods. Assassins haggled over myth. And the myth paid well. The more mysterious you seemed, the higher your fee. It turns out invisibility is worth more when people are certain it exists. Over time, these imagined brotherhoods became scapegoats. Whenever a noble died mysteriously, someone blamed the order. Kings accused rivals of hiring them. Priests saw Satan's hand in their silence. The myth became an all-purpose explanation, flexible enough to serve any narrative. In that sense, the assassins achieved immortality not through deeds, but through accusation. By the Renaissance, playwrights turned them into characters, tragic, loyal, cursed by conscience. Artists painted them as silhouettes, with daggers poised against the moon. The real killers had long been forgotten, but their invention thrived. You can almost smile at the irony, a profession built on anonymity becoming the most famous secret in Europe. And though centuries passed, the legend never died. Even now we picture them in hoods, gliding through palaces, bound by vows older than time. Maybe it's comforting to think death has a system, that even chaos keeps a ledger. Myths, after all, are just human attempts to make sense of the unreasonable. In the end, the brotherhoods existed where all legends do, not in history, but in imagination. A convenient fiction that outlived the facts, quietly whispering that somewhere, in every era, Someone is always paid to make silence permanent. The myths grew so loud they drowned out truth. Chroniclers, desperate for meaning, claimed assassins trained in secret monasteries where vows replaced names. You can almost see the quills scratching feverishly, inventing rituals of initiation, candles in circles, daggers dipped in wine, oaths sworn under eclipses. None of it happened. But facts seldom stand a chance against stories that sell. Reality was practical, not poetic. Training consisted of repetition, throw, stab, run, repeat. There were no robes, no hidden scrolls. An assassin's library was the city itself, rooftops, market stalls, taverns. Their scripture was muscle memory. They prayed not to gods, but to timing. And yet, historians preferred fantasies about enlightenment through murder. It sounded nobler, easier to teach. Writers from distant lands embellished freely. They kill without sound, one said. They vanish in smoke, wrote another. Travelers loved exaggeration. It made them important. Each version added new powers, potions that rendered them invisible, herbs that made them immune to pain. You can almost laugh imagining the real assassin reading those stories while coughing from damp air and spoiled meat. The notion of loyalty also warped with retelling. Tales spoke of absolute obedience, of killers who'd leap from cliffs at a whisper from their master. The truth was far less dramatic. Loyalty lasted exactly as long as payment did. Brotherhood ended when the coin ran out. They didn't serve empires or ideologies, they served hunger and habit. But admitting that robbed the myth of its romance. Religious fear kept the tales alive. The church needed monsters to validate saints. So the assassin became both cautionary tale and convenient enemy, a symbol of godless efficiency. Beware the man who kills without reason, preachers warned, while noblemen quietly wrote contracts to hire him. Morality was a performance, and everyone knew their lines. By the 15th century, entire manuals of assassin law circulated through courts. Kings studied them the way children study ghost stories. Some even copied the methods: poisons, disguises, decoys. The myth became self-fulfilling. People began to imitate what never existed. The imagination trained reality like a dog. Painters joined the conspiracy. Their canvases showed hooded men framed by moonlight, faces half hidden, daggers gleaming with righteousness. The art wasn't documentation, it was propaganda for mystery. You can almost smell the oil paint and candle wax. See the artist squinting to capture the exact angle of menace. They weren't painting killers, they were painting comfort, the illusion that evil looked obvious. Even modern historians still chase these ghosts. Each discovery feeds another misunderstanding, another best-selling fantasy about ancient orders and sacred vengeance. Perhaps humanity needs the myth more than the truth. The idea of an organized evil makes us feel safer than random cruelty. If someone controls it, maybe it can be stopped. Chaos, on the other hand, answers to no one. The real assassins, if they could see the stories written about them, would probably laugh or charge extra. They never hid in temples or plotted grand revolutions. They hid in plain sight, ate cold stew, and hoped to live another week. Their philosophy, if any, was endurance. Their creed was repetition. Still, myths have a strange persistence. They fossilize ignorance into comfort. The imagined orders of assassins outlived every real one because they gave fear a costume, a shape we could name. Truth dissolves. Stories ossify. You can almost feel the dust of centuries settling over exaggerations that became scripture. And somewhere beneath that dust lies the quieter truth, that assassins didn't need brotherhoods or blessings. They needed hunger, silence, and opportunity. Everything else was embroidery. But myths, like blood, stain deeper than fact. And centuries later, when we picture the hood and the blade, it isn't the lie we remember, it's the beauty of believing it. Metal sings when it's honest. You can almost hear it now, the soft rasp of a blade drawn slow from its sheath, the whisper of steel on leather. Every assassin's tool was an extension of the hand, the will, the lie. Blades weren't just weapons, they were confidants. The finest ones were quiet, unremarkable, light enough to vanish in sleeves and thoughts alike. Perfection wasn't sharpness, it was silence. Steel didn't boast, it waited. Knives varied by geography and poverty. Italian stiletto, French poignard, English bollock dagger, each had its own personality, like dogs bred for different kinds of loyalty. Some curved to follow ribs, others tapered to slip between armor plates, handles wrapped in linen to soak the sweat of fear. None were decorative, all were intimate. You could almost feel the cold hilt against your palm, balancing destiny and design. Poison, though, it fascinated everyone. The invisible art. Apothecaries traded recipes in whispers: belladonna, arsenic, henbane, wolfsbane. The real masters weren't assassins, but herbalists who'd never killed anyone directly. A pinch too much meant discovery, too little meant failure. There were no second chances. You can smell it in your imagination: bitter almonds, sour wine, rotting herbs steeped in superstition. Every vial carried both profit and paranoia. Delivery methods were creative: rings with hidden needles, hollowed hairpins, pages dusted with powders that entered through skin. In royal courts, paranoia became fashion. Tasters stood by every meal, doomed to die for culinary curiosity. Even perfume wasn't safe. Women's wrists became weapons. The assassin's toolkit was as elegant as it was grotesque, the ultimate fusion of vanity and violence. Not all tools were lethal. Some were purely practical: grappling hooks, wax keys molded from stolen impressions, ropes smeared with tallow for silent climbs. Creativity was survival. The best assassins were inventors in the wrong century. They learned to adapt civilian objects: a cobbler's awl, a shepherd's crook, a kitchen ladle with a hidden edge. Ingenuity disguised itself as poverty. Crossbows offered distance, but invited noise. A bolt fired at night carried more than death. It carried echo. So they favored handheld versions, small enough to conceal beneath a cloak. Reloading was slow, nerve-wracking, and precise. Every mechanism creaked like guilt. The weapon demanded composure. Panic meant failure. You can picture the assassin crouched in darkness, counting breaths, waiting for one clean shot to rearrange history. Some experimented with early forms of smoke bombs, mixtures of sulfur and resin that choked air and vision. Not lethal, but useful for confusion. Imagine a medieval alley flooded with grey haze, torchlight bleeding weakly through it. In that chaos, a man could vanish and be reborn 2 streets away under a different name. Death was often secondary to the performance of it. Even sound could be weaponized. A dropped coin to lure a guard, a whistled tune to mask footsteps. Distraction was a craft. The finest assassins never fought at all. They orchestrated outcomes. Violence was just punctuation in a longer sentence of manipulation. You can almost admire it in the same detached way you'd admire a storm that never misses its timing. Cleaning the tools was as intimate as confession. Warm water, oil, soft cloth. No chatter, no thoughts, just rhythm. Blood stiffened into memory if ignored. Maintenance wasn't hygiene, it was ritual, a small rebellion against chaos. To care for the blade was to acknowledge the living weight of what it had done. Each weapon told a story. Some blades carried names, some bore nicks from near-death encounters. A crack in the hilt could remind you of a rooftop escape. A stain that never washed out could whisper of a noble's last breath. Objects don't forget, even if people do. You can almost feel their haunted texture, relics of human intent. Tools evolved, but purpose didn't. Every device, whether crude or sophisticated, existed to restore a kind of balance, the economy of vengeance, justice, or survival. Each innovation shortened the distance between thought and consequence. The assassin's genius wasn't invention, it was restraint. And somewhere between oil and blood, between mechanism and mortality, a strange respect formed. For the blade, for the craft, for the inevitability. They didn't fear their tools, they feared what they made possible. You can smell the disguise before you see it. Cheap perfume, sweat beneath borrowed fabric, the faint musk of anxiety. Disguise was the assassin's second skin, and few wore it comfortably. The trick wasn't costume, it was confidence. People believed what they expected to see. So the best disguises were invisible, a gait altered by a limp, a calloused hand pretending to belong to a craftsman, a priest's tone rehearsed just enough to fool confession. Clothing was chosen by occupation, not aesthetics. A servant's livery granted passage, a monk's robe excused silence. Nobles moved freely, but peasants went unnoticed. The assassin selected whichever role suited the geography of suspicion. Every stitch lied on their behalf. You can almost feel the rough wool scraping your neck, the heat building beneath layers meant for deception, not comfort. Makeup existed, though primitive, charcoal smudged to age the face, chalk to pale it, berry stains to mimic exhaustion or illness. In dim light, details didn't matter. Movement did. The assassin learned to embody the illusion physically. Shoulders slumped for humility, eyes lowered for servitude, posture straightened for authority. The body became language. Translation determined survival. Speech, too, was weaponized. Accents practiced, dialects imitated, stutters invented. One misplaced vowel could cost a life. They learned how to talk like they belonged, using the right idioms, the right casual indifference. Even silence had syntax. A servant who didn't gossip stood out more than one who did. Deception required noise, just the right amount of it. Sometimes, the disguise was emotional. The assassin learned to mimic concern and fear, reverence. To hold eye contact just long enough to convince, never long enough to connect. Empathy rehearsed, not felt. They called it acting centuries before theatre became art. The stage was real, the consequences fatal. You can almost hear the applause of suspicion withheld. They also mastered vanishing in plain sight. A man sweeping floors, a woman lighting candles, a beggar asleep against a wall. The city's blindness was their camouflage. Invisibility wasn't about hiding, it was about being unimportant. Once the job was done, they simply became part of the scenery again, absorbed into the background hum of life. Occasionally, they used decoys, sending another dressed identically, into the streets while they escaped elsewhere. Confusion as choreography. The guard's attention turned toward the decoy while the real killer slipped through a door no one remembered seeing. The trick worked because people remember fear, not faces. Masks existed for festivals and funerals, and assassins borrowed both. A mask made you mythic, neither man nor memory. It allowed cruelty without witness, identity without accountability. Under the mask, even hesitation dissolved. You can almost feel the fabric's damp interior, the sound of your own breath trapped against your skin. Anonymity is addictive. Women had an advantage. Society never looked too closely at them unless it wanted something. A serving maid could move through corridors where soldiers hesitated. A midwife could enter rooms guarded by propriety. Their disguises required no costume, just societal blindness. Power hid easily behind underestimation. In time, deception became second nature. They forgot who they were beneath the layers of falsehood. Each role left residue, the gait of a sailor, the calm of a monk, the arrogance of a noble, identity frayed, stitched together by necessity. Perhaps that's why so many assassins eventually disappeared voluntarily. After years of pretending, reality felt like another mask. You can almost see it now, a crowded street, sunlight glinting off puddles, and among the hundreds of faces, one passes by entirely unnoticed. That was the true art, not killing, not stealth, but existing so perfectly within expectation that the world looked right past you. The greatest deception of all was convincing everyone, including yourself, that you were never there. Gold had its own morality. It smelled faintly of heat, grease, and other people's fear. You can almost hear the sound of it sliding across a tavern table, coins meeting wood like punctuation marks in a secret conversation. The trade in killing wasn't chaos, it was commerce. Rates fluctuated with politics. In times of peace, assassins starved. In times of turmoil, they flourished like mold in damp stone. Cities treated death as an unspoken tax. Every wealthy man eventually owed someone a quiet favor. Every power had its shadow expenditure. Nobles kept separate ledgers, one for estates, another for eliminations. You could almost picture a clerk tallying miscellaneous expenses, pretending not to know they represented throats and secrets. Assassination was simply business administration with worse lighting. The marketplace extended across borders. Venetian merchants hired Sicilian hands. French dukes imported German steel. Killing was globalization before trade routes had names. Messengers carried contracts encrypted in gossip, delivered through courtesans or monks. Even war generals outsourced personal problems. Why risk open conflict when subtlety could handle it overnight? Diplomacy, after all, was just expensive silence. Coin decided everything. Gold meant discretion, silver meant risk, copper meant amateur hour. A single noble's life could cost the same as a cottage, a vineyard, or a decade's worth of grain. Death had tiers, like wine, common, vintage, or divine. You can almost taste the irony of luxury bleeding into mortality. The more someone was worth alive, the more valuable they became dead. Payments weren't always monetary. Sometimes they came in secrets, passage out of prison, introductions to powerful patrons, even children spared from conscription. The assassin's economy accepted any currency that preserved survival. Trust, though, was worthless. It depreciated immediately. Debt was enforced not by contracts but consequence. Bankers pretended innocence, yet the same chests that held trade profits often stored assassination funds. church vaults. 2. Hid their share of unholy deposits. Priests would bless the gold before spending it, as if sanctity could disinfect sin. Money, like confession, could buy peace of mind, but never purity. There were even intermediaries, shadow accountants of the underworld. They tracked reputations, set fair prices, and ensured payments reached their recipients. Killing, paradoxically, relied on order. The system worked because everyone feared what happened if it didn't. A missed payment might end a lineage. Commerce enforced morality where conscience failed. For the assassin, profit rarely brought wealth. The cost of living in secrecy was high: bribes, safe houses, disguises, and relocation. They were rich for moments, then poor again by dawn. The pattern repeated endlessly: earn, spend, vanish, begin again. A circular economy powered by paranoia. You can almost hear the weary clink of a coin purse emptied too many times. Economies feed on predictability, and death was the most predictable industry of all. There was always demand. Love, envy, and ambition never went out of style. If anything, assassins provided stability, a gruesome balance to greed. Each contract settled a dispute faster than courts ever could. Perhaps that's why rulers secretly respected them. Efficiency transcends ethics. Eventually, entire cities depended on this invisible commerce. It funded guards, bribed officials, and shaped borders without banners. Assassination became the invisible hand guiding power, the shadow currency of civilization. And though no one admitted it, everyone participated. The assassin, in the end, was merely a symptom. The disease was desire. People wanted too much, too fast, too permanently. The economy of death thrived not on evil, but on impatience. You can almost hear it still, the quiet arithmetic of greed balancing its books in blood. Affection was the most dangerous weapon of all. You can almost feel it, that warmth sneaking through cracks in a life built on secrecy. Love made the hand hesitate, the voice soften, the knife slower. Yet even killers were human. Solitude eventually turned toxic. So they reached for connection the way drowning men reach for driftwood, knowing it might sink them faster. Relationships existed in fragments, nights shared, mornings avoided. Lovers never knew real names, only habits. Some fell for tavern girls who didn't ask questions, others for fellow outcasts, healers, thieves, smugglers. Trust was replaced by timing, when to leave before truth became visible. The bed was a confessional without forgiveness. Friendship was rarer. The trade didn't encourage loyalty. Companions existed by circumstance, two men sharing a hideout, watching each other's backs out of mutual self-interest. Conversations stayed shallow, circling safe topics like weather and weapon care. The deeper the bond, the closer the betrayal. Even laughter sounded cautious, as if it might explode. Still, there were moments of tenderness. Sharing stolen food by candlelight, patching a wound, trading stories about lives they'd never live. Those small mercies stitched humanity back into their frayed existence. For a brief heartbeat, they were more than tools. You can almost hear the faint sigh of relief between their guarded silences. Many sought comfort in brothels, not out of lust, but longing. The exchange of coin for intimacy was safer than emotion, touch without consequence, conversation without confession. The illusion of connection, perfectly transactional. Love, when simplified to economics, became manageable. It's bleak, but it worked. Some did find genuine affection, usually with someone equally transient, a widow, a traveller, a performer. But secrecy poisoned everything. Lies multiplied faster than truth could catch them. One assassin's lover once confessed to the priest, and both vanished by nightfall. Intimacy, like exposure, invited extinction. For others, friendship formed with animals instead of people. Cats, dogs, occasionally crows. Creatures that listened without judging, that lived entirely in the present. Feeding a stray offered a strange stability. The animal didn't care who you'd killed, only if you remembered supper. Compassion survived best when it didn't need translation. Alcohol replaced company. The tavern became therapy. You can picture the assassin hunched over a mug, half listening to laughter that wasn't meant for him. The noise drowned conscience more effectively than confession ever could. Solitude, at least, was predictable. People were not. Sometimes they pretended to live normal lives, renting rooms under false trades, carpenter, scribe, tailor, buying flowers for themselves, attending festivals, clapping at performances they didn't enjoy. It wasn't deceit, it was rehearsal. Pretending to be ordinary reminded them of what they'd forfeited. You could almost feel the ache of belonging deferred, but secrets always leaked. A neighbor noticed strange hours, a lover found hidden weapons. Exposure came like dawn, inevitable, unhurried, merciless. Some fled. Some silenced discovery. Some surrendered to exhaustion. Because keeping lies alive takes energy, and even shadows need rest. And yet, despite all the loneliness, some assassins clung to the illusion of connection. They wrote letters they'd never send, whispered names into the dark, imagined futures they'd never risk. Love remained the only thing they couldn't assassinate cleanly. It lingered, persistent, inconveniently alive. In the end, every relationship was a performance, sweet, fleeting, necessary. Lies became lullabies, sung softly to keep the heart from waking up. You can almost hear them whispering to themselves in the dark, just one more night of pretending, because sometimes that was enough. Church bells sounded different when you'd killed someone. Their chime felt heavier, less forgiving, as if the air itself disapproved. You can almost hear it, dull echoes rolling through narrow alleys, vibrating against stone and guilt alike. Faith was never absent from the assassin's life. It just arrived in peculiar forms. They didn't reject God, they negotiated with him. Every prayer began like a business deal. One more job, one more sunrise, one more unpunished sin. Confession became strategy, not salvation. A killer could kneel in the same pew as his victim's widow and still whisper the same absolutions. Priests asked no questions when the tithe was generous. Some even offered coded blessings, promising divine discretion. Holiness, like steel, could be repurposed. You can almost smell the incense curling through the shadows, smoke trying to hide the stench of sweat and iron. Assassins weren't atheists, they couldn't afford to be. Belief was insurance, something to blame, something to beg. They feared damnation less than randomness. Eternal punishment at least implied order. To them, hell was preferable to chaos. You could prepare for hell, you couldn't prepare for luck. Their prayers were oddly practical. Let the lock be loose. Let the torch burn low. Let my hand not shake. Simple requests, offered to saints with questionable portfolios. Saint Dismas, the good thief, Saint Jude, the hopeless, Saint Hubert, patron of accidents. You can picture their murmurs under breath, faith reimagined as superstition, wearing stolen robes. Superstition itself had matured. They still carried charms, bird bones wrapped in cloth, tiny crosses, bits of parchment scrawled with psalms. But now the rituals had blended with guilt. Touching the doorway before a job wasn't just for luck, it was apology in advance. Faith and fear were identical twins. Even the devout couldn't tell them apart. The church loomed over every city, a watchtower of judgment and hypocrisy. Its candles glowed in every assassin's memory, not as light, but as reminder. The same priests who condemned them by day would quietly benefit from their work by night. Religion made them useful. Redemption made them expendable. You can almost feel the irony vibrating in every whispered prayer. Yet faith also comforted them. After a kill, many would pause to cross themselves, not mockingly, but tenderly, a ritual of control over the uncontrollable. They didn't expect forgiveness. They expected familiarity. Habit masquerading as holiness. Maybe that's all faith really was. A pattern repeated until it felt like protection. Some sought penance in strange ways. One assassin reportedly gave away half his earnings to orphanages. Another built chapels on roads leading out of cities he'd poisoned. Redemption was currency, spent quietly, never in full. They weren't trying to erase their sins, only to bargain for softer consequences. A kind of celestial plea deal. Others took it further, joining monasteries after retirement. You can almost see the irony, a man who once studied breath for killing, now teaching novices how to pray with it. In the stillness of cloisters, they found something resembling peace. Maybe not forgiveness, but acceptance. Sometimes the difference was enough. Faith, in the end, became their last disguise. The rosary in the pocket, the whispered prayer before sleep, the promise to quit after one more job. Belief kept them human when everything else tried to make them efficient. And perhaps that's why they clung to it. Because even the darkest profession needs light to measure its own shadow. Every age of fear eventually civilizes itself. You can almost feel the shift, the growing weight of law replacing whispers, the streets brightening with lanterns, guards patrolling instead of praying. By the late Renaissance, assassination was no longer art, it was liability. The world had found new, bureaucratic ways to kill. Cities expanded, government centralized, and records multiplied. Names were written down, faces remembered. The anonymity that once protected killers dissolved under paper and ink. Bureaucracy, in its dull efficiency, did what morality never could. It made murder inconvenient. The assassin's greatest weapon had always been invisibility. And now, visibility was mandatory. Gunpowder changed everything. A trigger could do what a lifetime of training once required. Distance replaced intimacy. Killing became mechanical, democratic, and loud. You can almost hear the shift, the echoing crack of muskets, drowning out the quiet sigh of daggers. The assassin's poetry was replaced by percussion. Efficiency devoured elegance. The nobles adapted first. They hired soldiers, not specialists. Armies became the new instruments of assassination, capable of erasing not individuals, but entire families at once. Death scaled up, and in scaling, it lost personality. There was no art left in it, no silence, no ritual, just smoke and paperwork. The few assassins who survived did so by rebranding: spies, couriers, agents, diplomats. their blades replaced by pens and secrets. The skill set remained, just translated. Observation became intelligence. Stealth became discretion. The profession evolved into something more palatable to civilization, espionage. You can almost see them, older now, dressed in fine coats instead of cloaks, trading whispers in salons instead of alleys. The romantic myths outlived the practitioners. Ballads still sang of hooded killers. Playwrights dramatized moral conflict and tragic purpose. The truth faded under applause. History remembered them not as laborers of death, but as archetypes, symbols of rebellion, justice, freedom. Ironically, they became heroes in the stories of people who would have feared them most. But even myth has a shelf life. As modernity crept in, streetlights, newspapers, police, mystery lost its market value. The assassin's craft was too human to survive an age obsessed with progress. It retreated underground, fragmenting into gangs, secret societies, political movements. Ideology replaced payment, martyrdom replaced contract. The profession didn't die, it changed its name. Still, echoes remained. You can almost feel them in the rhythm of history, revolutions sparked by invisible hands, rulers falling to accidents, regimes collapsing in quiet rooms. Every era rediscovers the utility of silence. The tools evolve, the motive doesn't. And so, as the old assassins vanished, their ghosts lingered, woven into literature, religion, entertainment. The legend became safer than the truth. People could admire what they no longer had to fear. The blade became metaphor, the killer became myth, and the silence became history. If you listen closely, though, the past still hums beneath the noise of progress. Somewhere between bureaucracy and nostalgia, the assassin's shadow survives, a reminder that civilization never truly outgrows its appetite for tidy endings. The world just prefers them with paperwork. You walk slower now, through streets that no longer remember their crimes. The air is softer here, carrying the smell of old rain and bread baked hours ago. The cobblestones are smooth, patient, glistening faintly beneath lanterns that hum like half-forgotten prayers. Somewhere, a bell rings the wrong hour and no one bothers to correct it. The city, like you, is tired of keeping time. Beneath these stones, there are layers, centuries pressed together like pages. Each carries a whisper. Boots that ran, hands that trembled, blades that hesitated. You can almost hear the faint scrape of iron beneath your feet, echoes of purpose that have long since dissolved. History doesn't vanish. It just learns to whisper quieter. A cool breeze slips through an archway and brushes your face. It smells faintly of lime dust, old wood, and the ashes of distant fires. You pause, feeling that air move through you as though you, too, are part of this architecture. One more ghost passing gently through stone. The night accepts you without question. Every corner seems to breathe. Shutters sway, ropes creak, a cat pads across a wall. Life persists in small ways, gentle and deliberate. You think about how the assassins once lived among these same sounds, how each noise meant survival or discovery. Now, it's only texture, the city exhaling in sleep. There's comfort in realizing the world forgot its own fear. Once, these alleys pulsed with tension. Now they cradle stillness. You can almost feel the past trying to apologize for its noise. In the quiet, even guilt begins to sound like grace. The darkness no longer hides anything, it only protects what's resting. You pass an old doorway sealed with plaster. Someone once escaped through it. Someone else probably died nearby. The wall doesn't say which. It just stands, unmoved, as though mercy has turned into mortar. You touch it lightly, fingers cold against age, and feel the small vibration of everything that has ever been buried but not gone. Far above, a window glows faintly. A candle still burns there, swaying as someone reads, or prays, or waits. You think of how many nights ended the same way, one light refusing to go out, even when surrounded by darkness. It's strange how defiance and hope look identical from a distance. Your footsteps echo, measured and steady, each one blending into the rhythm of the city's forgotten heart. The repetition lulls you. The sound isn't yours anymore, it belongs to history. And with each step, you feel yourself dissolving into that rhythm, part of the same lullaby that once carried blades and secrets alike. The smell of damp stone sharpens as a faint drizzle begins. Raindrops gather in the seams between cobbles, erasing footprints almost as soon as they appear. You watch as each trace fades. The city has learned mercy. Even the earth participates in forgetting. Somewhere, faint music drifts from a distant window, strings perhaps, or a voice humming a song that never needed words. The melody folds around you, soft and deliberate, like linen being laid over memory. It doesn't matter who sings, only that someone still does. And as you reach the square, empty and bright beneath the moon, you realize the silence here isn't hollow, it's full. Full of endings that didn't shout, of moments that chose to fade gracefully. Every stone carries peace now, every shadow knows its place. The story isn't over, it's simply resting. The air cools against your skin. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. What you hear isn't absence. It's presence, softened by time. The assassins are gone, yes, but the patience of their stillness remains. And perhaps that, in its quiet way, was their truest legacy. There is a kind of silence that doesn't ask for explanation. It arrives slowly like snowfall, covering everything that once burned. You can almost see it now, the white hush settling over the city, softening the edges of centuries. Chimneys sigh out thin smoke, roofs gleam with dew, and for the first time, the night feels gentle. The violence of history exhales. You walk through this softness as though through water. Every movement slower, quieter, more deliberate. The air carries faint sweetness, ash and rain mixing into something clean. Each breath feels older than the body it fills. You realize that time doesn't pass here, it drifts. You aren't walking through the past is walking through you. Somewhere in the distance, a door opens. You imagine an old assassin, long retired, stepping outside for one last look at the world. He doesn't carry weapons anymore, only memory. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. Everything he once fought against, noise, order, consequence, has turned into stillness. It's a fair trade. He sits on a step, feeling the stone's coolness against his palms. The city hums around him, alive yet calm. He watches the moon ripple in a puddle, watches his reflection blur and reform with each droplet that falls. For the first time in his life, nothing hides behind the dark. The world no longer demands anything from him. You can almost feel that same stillness now, the kind that hums just below hearing, like the pause between two heartbeats. It's the silence that follows resolution, not defeat. The sound of everything finding its place. Even memory stops struggling and simply lies down beside the present. Somewhere, the clock tower marks another hour. But it doesn't sound like time passing. It sounds like permission to rest, to stop keeping track. The assassin's world, once measured in seconds and shadows, has surrendered to eternity's slower rhythm. The city, too, has stopped defending itself. History no longer fears remembering. You watch the clouds drift over the moon, their edges dissolving into the night. Light and dark, fear and forgiveness, blending until they're indistinguishable. That's how history heals, not with justice, but with forgetfulness dressed as peace. It's imperfect, but merciful. The rain thickens, drumming softly on rooftops and shoulders alike. Each drop feels like punctuation at the end of a sentence that took too long to write. You tilt your head back and let it wash over you. The past runs down your face and into the street, unburdened at last. Inside a nearby chapel, someone lights a candle. Its glow spills through a crack in the door, painting gold on wet stone. That small flame doesn't fight the darkness. It simply coexists with it. You realize that's what the assassins never learned, that peace doesn't arrive by removing shadows, but by sitting quietly beside them. You breathe in deeply. The scent of wax, rain, and distant bread lingers in the air. Everything feels softer now, slower, weightless. History isn't a wound, it's a lullaby, sung in languages no one remembers, but everyone somehow understands. As the night deepens, the city folds itself into calm. Windows dim, streets empty, bells fade. The assassin's story has become something else entirely, not a warning, not a legend, but a kind of comfort, proof that even chaos, given enough time, learns to sleep. And as the last echoes drift into the distance, you realize the story never truly belonged to the assassins. It belonged to the silence that followed them, the same silence that follows you now, patient, endless, and kind. The air feels heavier now, yet somehow softer, like a blanket soaked in twilight. You can almost taste it, the faint mineral calm that follows rain. The streets glisten, reflecting a world that no longer rushes. Every droplet on the cobblestones carries its own small universe, trembling with borrowed light. The city isn't dead, it's exhaling. For the first time in centuries, it feels like everyone, living and gone, is breathing in rhythm again. The storms of history have passed. Empires have risen, fallen, rebuilt themselves from the ashes of their own pride. You stand amid the ruins of their certainty, and it feels peaceful. The violence that once gave purpose now hums like distant thunder, fading. You can almost hear it, miles away, just enough to remind you that even destruction grows tired. The air smells faintly of wet clay and candle smoke, the scent of renewal disguised as decay. Pigeons coo softly under eaves, their calls slow and rhythmic, as if marking the heartbeat of this sleeping city. Everything that once screamed has learned to whisper. Everything sharp has softened at the edges. You begin to understand that peace isn't silence. It's the absence of hurry. You pass a fountain still trickling under the moonlight. The water glows faintly, milky and quiet. Centuries ago, it might have been red. Tonight, it looks like mercy. Drops fall into the basin with gentle precision, each one creating a sound that feels less like impact and more like invitation. To stop, to listen, to finally rest. A cat appears, thin but serene, padding along the wet stone as if guarding some sacred stillness. Its eyes catch the lamplight, twin embers of indifference. You realize it knows more peace than most kings ever found. The animal doesn't remember history, doesn't need forgiveness, it simply exists, and in doing so, redeems the street it walks on. You think about all the noise humans create trying to prove they mattered. Wars, sermons, monuments, books. Yet it's this gentle breathing of the world after chaos that feels eternal. Maybe legacy isn't what remains. Maybe it's what stops needing to. The assassin's craft has vanished, but its discipline lingers. The art of stillness, the patience of timing, the respect for silence, these survived evolution. We call them meditation now, or reflection, or grace. Perhaps we've just repackaged survival into something softer, more civilized. You can almost smile at the irony of that. Above you, clouds drift lazily across the moon. Light filters through in patches, moving across rooftops like gentle hands. You remember the stories of blades flashing in that same light, and suddenly the contrast feels absurd. The same moon that once watched murder now illuminates forgiveness without trying. Nature never takes sides. You breathe slower. The rhythm of your steps aligns with something ancient, something underneath language. Even the echo sounds content now, as if it's relieved to have purpose again. Every sound is smaller, every thought lighter. The world doesn't demand attention, it offers it. Somewhere, a window opens, someone is singing softly, their voice fragile as smoke. You don't recognize the tune, but it feels familiar, like a melody you've heard in a dream. The lyrics, though foreign, translate perfectly into calm. The voice fades, and the silence it leaves behind feels almost holy. You stop walking, not because you've arrived anywhere, but because there's nowhere left to go. This moment, this stillness, is destination enough. The rain has ended. The blade has rusted. The story has learned to sleep, standing up. And you too begin to feel the weight of peace settle softly in your chest. And as you stand there, unmoving, the city shifts around you, not changing, not waking, just being. You realize that maybe history isn't something we escape. It's something we join, quietly, one breath at a time. There's a peculiar beauty in shadows that no longer hide anything. You can see them now, long, soft, unthreatening, spilling from arches and drifting over walls. They move gently, like the memory of old fears turned kind. Once, they were tools of survival. Now, they're just the city's way of remembering shape. Even darkness, it seems, grows weary of pretending to be dangerous. The night carries no secrets anymore. Every whisper has already been told, every sin confessed by time itself. You can almost hear history snoring softly, its once terrible stories dulled by repetition. The streets don't listen. They've heard enough. What remains is not guilt, but gentleness, the residue of forgiveness nobody asked for, but everyone needed. You walk past an open courtyard where vines crawl over forgotten statues. Their faces, eroded by weather, look peaceful now, neither proud nor punished. Nature doesn't care who they were, it just wraps them evenly in patience. Moss grows where names used to be. Flowers bloom from cracks once filled with blood. That's what eternity looks like when it's done arguing. The moonlight touches everything equally, stone, wood, scar, leaf. It doesn't remember who sinned and who prayed. It just glows, impartial and infinite. You realize this is the final justice, not punishment or redemption, but irrelevance. The world eventually forgets the difference. And that forgetting feels strangely kind. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open and then closes again. You don't turn to look. You've learned that not all sounds demand attention. The world functions perfectly without your interpretation. For once, you allow it. The act of not knowing becomes its own form of peace. A breeze stirs, cool and familiar. It smells of damp fabric and smoldered candlewick, the signature scent of endings. You let it move through you, brushing your hair, lifting your collar, erasing your temperature. It doesn't matter who you were when you started this walk. The air doesn't discriminate. You reach an old bridge. Beneath it, the river murmurs stories to itself. Water remembers differently, never holding shape, never clinging to detail, only rhythm. You lean on the railing, watching the moon's reflection ripple. It splits and reforms endlessly, never breaking, only transforming. Perhaps that's what forgiveness really is. Not forgetting, but reshaping. The wooden boards creak softly beneath your weight. A moment ago, this bridge might have meant escape. Now, it simply means arrival. You stay there, feeling the faint vibration of water moving underfoot, steady and alive. Somewhere downstream, history keeps flowing toward oceans too vast to judge it. You think about the assassins again, not their knives or contracts, but their moments alone afterward when silence arrived like a visitor. Maybe they too felt this same strange peace between guilt and gratitude. Maybe, deep down, everyone just wants the same ending, to be allowed to rest without needing to explain. The city is barely breathing now. Windows dark, air cool, clocks unsure, everything feels balanced, weightless. You close your eyes and realize the shadow you've been following wasn't theirs. It was yours, learning finally to lie still. The story outside has quieted, and the one inside has joined it. And as you stand there, listening to the river hum beneath the bridge, you understand that peace isn't something the world gives you, it's something the noise eventually forgets to take away. The streets have fallen into something gentler than silence. You can almost feel it, the steady pulse of sleep beneath the stone. Windows glow faintly with the dim orange of late candles, their flames bending as if nodding off mid-prayer. Even the wind moves differently now, soft, hesitant, unwilling to wake what it once tormented. The city has stopped remembering itself and begun to dream. In those dreams, the buildings breathe. The roofs expand with sighs, the chimneys hum low lullabies, and the cobblestones, warm from centuries of footsteps, seem to hum in their sleep. It's not imagination, it's exhaustion becoming tenderness. The place that once devoured ambition now murmurs comfort. Cities, like people, eventually surrender to stillness. You walk slowly past a row of empty stalls. The scent of dried fruit, leather, and old wood lingers like memory reluctant to leave. Where merchants once shouted, moths now circle. The absence of commerce feels holy somehow. It's proof that not everything needs to be exchanged to have value. The quiet has replaced currency, time has become its only wealth. Somewhere nearby, a fountain overflows softly. Water spills over its edge, pooling at your feet, reflecting moonlight like liquid glass. It feels deliberate, as if the world is performing calmness just for you. You can almost hear each ripple speaking in a language older than words. Rest. rest, rest. You pass a row of statues, each worn faceless by centuries of rain. They look peaceful, humbled by erosion. It occurs to you that maybe that's how wisdom forms, not through survival, but through surrender. When even marble stops trying to endure, truth finally gets a voice. A soft fog begins to rise from the ground, curling through the alleys like smoke that forgot its fire. It blurs corners, mutes edges, smooths everything into something shapeless and kind. The fog doesn't hide, it forgives. It takes sharp memories and rounds them into something bearable. You pause beneath an archway. A lantern swings gently overhead, creaking on its hook. The sound is slow, rhythmic, hypnotic, back and forth, back and forth. It feels like time itself has decided to sway instead of move. You match your breathing to its motion, and the world obliges by slowing down with you. Somewhere, a clock tower sighs out a single note, low, patient, almost reluctant. The sound drifts across rooftops, touching everything once before fading. It doesn't tell the time anymore, it just reminds the night that it's still here. The city no longer measures life by minutes, but by peace. You realize the assassins once sought this same feeling, the clean slate after chaos, the stillness after precision. Perhaps all their discipline was just an early form of yearning for calm. They chased quiet through violence. They could have found it here, in the simple act of breathing. A dog barks once in the distance, then stops, embarrassed by its own echo. Even noise has learned humility. You smile faintly because the world, after everything, feels forgiven. Not redeemed, just forgiven by its own fatigue. And as you keep walking, your reflection wavers in every puddle, less distinct each time. You're blending into the dream the city is having. The walls no longer observe you, they include you. You're not watching history anymore. You're resting inside it. Stillness has a texture. It feels like dust suspended in morning light, like breath that doesn't need to end. You can almost touch it now, the way air presses softly against your skin, the way sound refuses to form. Even your heartbeat seems to slow to match the rhythm of walls that have forgotten movement. The world is holding its breath, and for once, it isn't waiting for anything. You find yourself at the edge of the city, where stone gives way to field. Grass whispers beneath your boots, and dew clings to your ankles like polite ghosts. Beyond this, nothing demands attention. No towers, no torches, no witnesses, just horizon wide and quiet and patient. It feels like the earth itself is resetting its pulse. The sky begins to pale. The faintest blue stretches through the dark, brushing away the stars like crumbs. You realize dawn isn't coming to the city, it's coming from it, as if all that silence has finally condensed into light. Morning here isn't announcement, it's apology. You can almost hear it. Whisper, "I'm sorry for how loud we were." Birdsong begins softly, hesitant, as though unsure it's allowed. A single note, then another, each one testing the air. The sound doesn't break the stillness, it completes it. Even the smallest life knows how to return without demanding applause. You breathe in, and for the first time the air feels new. You sit on a low wall, its surface cool against your palms. The stone hums faintly with memory, nothing tragic, just lived. You realize peace doesn't erase the past, It simply stops arguing with it. The stories carved into this place are still here, just quieter, their sharpness worn down by mercy. Your eyes trace the outlines of rooftops, towers, bridges. They look softer now, like thoughts that forgot to harden into regret. The entire world seems to exhale through light. Every crack, every scar glows faintly, proof that brokenness and beauty have always been conspirators. Somewhere nearby, a baker stirs. The faint scent of yeast drifts through the morning, warm and forgiving. The same smell once masked blood in the streets. Now it only promises breakfast. You marvel at how effortlessly history repurposes itself. Survival, it turns out, is just change performed slowly enough to look peaceful. You look down at your hands and realize they've been still for a long time. Not clenched, not tense, just resting. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand explanation. You could stay here forever, and the world would permit it. You've stepped outside of necessity. The horizon lightens further, spilling gold across the river. Water carries it downstream, scattering dawn like loose coins. It's beautiful in a way that doesn't need witnesses. The world doesn't perform, it just exists. And you understand, maybe for the first time, that peace isn't an absence of conflict, but the patience to let everything exist exactly as it is. You close your eyes and listen. The sounds of morning, birds, wind, distant footsteps, meld into one soft breath. Time feels circular, like a song repeating the verse you didn't notice before. The assassin's story, the city's memory, your quiet presence, they're all the same rhythm now. And as sunlight finally touches your face, the last of the night fades, not defeated, but fulfilled. It's not the end of darkness. It's just the moment both light and shadow agree to rest together. The city is quiet now, not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that has nothing left to prove. You can almost feel it breathing with you, the rhythm of walls and lungs synchronized after a long night of remembering. The past has stopped speaking in sentences and begun to hum instead. A lullaby too ancient for language. Everything that needed to happen has already happened. Everything that mattered has already been forgiven by time. You stand at the edge of dawn, watching light fold gently over stone. It feels tender, almost shy, like the world is afraid to wake itself. The air smells of dust and rain and something sweet you can't quite name. Maybe bread, maybe memory. The assassins, the rulers, the believers, the betrayed, all of them dissolved into this same morning light. History doesn't end in triumph or tragedy. It ends in continuation, in breath. You think about how every story begins with motion and ends with rest. Even chaos, if you let it, eventually runs out of energy. That's the gift of time. It transforms violence into quiet, noise into rhythm, life into sleep. You can almost hear it now, beneath your pulse, the soft echo of centuries turning over in their sleep. Somewhere, a bird sings again. The same note it's sung for 1,000 dawns. The sound feels holy without trying to be. It doesn't ask for meaning. It simply exists. Maybe that's the secret the assassins never found, that peace doesn't come from control, but from surrender. That silence, when allowed to breathe, becomes something alive. You inhale slowly. The air is cool, the kind that wakes only the gentlest parts of you. Your body feels heavier, but your mind lighter. as though both have agreed to rest at the same pace. The story has stopped needing you to listen. It just wants you to be here, still, with it. If you listen closely, you'll notice that the world isn't empty, it's full of waiting. The stones wait for sunlight. The air waits for warmth. Even the silence waits for your next breath to complete it. That's how history works. It keeps existing quietly inside you until you decide to set it down. So let it go. Let the city sleep. Let the echoes fade. Let the centuries rest. The blades are gone. The footsteps have stopped. The whispers have turned into dust. All that remains is calm, wide, endless, forgiving. The kind of calm that doesn't erase the past but tucks it in. You close your eyes, and the night folds itself around you like soft linen. The air grows warm. The world exhales once more, slow and content. Nothing chases you now. Nothing hides. Everything is allowed to rest. And as your breathing settles into the rhythm of the sleeping city, you realize this was never a story about death, but about release. About the strange mercy of endings that don't demand explanation. About finding peace, not in escape, but in stillness. Sleep well, traveler. The story is finished, but the silence remains. Waiting, gentle, eternal,